I think of an antisocial bully who was a woman who came to me for help with her divorce. She was antisocial. She was total lies. And I found out her job was taking care of an elderly man. At some point, she disappeared. And I get a call from the elderly man saying, she stole $50,000 from me and I don't know where she is now.
There seems to be an increased rise of bullies in our country and in the world. And today I'm so excited to be introducing Bill Eddy, author of many books on high conflict resolution and relationships. He's also a therapist, a mediator, and an attorney. You may know him for his book, BIFF, which is brief, informative, friendly, and firm. But he also just recently wrote a new book called Our New World of Adult Bullies. And today he and I are going to talk about bullying behavior. What is it? Why is it on the rise? And what you can do about it if you're struggling with it in your life. I'm super excited today to be joined by Bill Eddy. I don't know how you can be in the narcissistic abuse arena and not be familiar with his work, because he wrote BIFF, BIFF, which stands for a technique to use with highly conflictual person. But he has a new book out called The New World Order of Adult Bullies. And so I'm so thrilled that you're here joining me today. Why don't you tell us a little bit about you? Because I wasn't aware that you wore so many different hats.
Okay. Well, the first hat really was as a licensed clinical social worker doing child and family therapy in the 1980s and early 1990s for about 12 years. But I really like conflict resolution and mediation, and volunteered at Community Mediation Center in San Diego, where I'm based. And because of that, I thought I want to do more mediation work, and lawyers were doing mediation. And there weren't a lot of mediation jobs, but family, divorce mediation, all of that. So I went to law school. I decided to practice law for a couple of years while I was doing mediation. But I ended up doing law for 15 years, representing clients in family court at the same time as I was doing out-of-court divorce mediation. 2 careers based on top of my counseling career. So 3 hats together. And in 2008, I co-founded the High Conflict Institute with Megan Hunter, who had been a court administrator, to focus on training professionals in dealing with the high conflict personalities, including narcissistic personalities. And now it's 2024. So I'll put together about 40 years with some of each of these careers.
Wow, that's really amazing. And it gives you a very unique perspective, one of what happens legally, but also what's happening psychodynamically or interpersonally. I'm curious, what prompted you to write Our New World of Adult Bullies? What did you feel like you needed to speak into around with that book?
Well, I started during the end of 2020, which was the first year of COVID, and a couple things were happening. One is in the news, we were seeing a lot of bullying around masks, around vaccines, around the George Floyd murder, around protests with the George Floyd murder. And on both sides of a lot of these things, people were getting a lot of attention for really bullying each other, bullying people in stores, bullying people on the street. And so I've worked with bullies and families, domestic violence, parental alienation, stuff like that. I've worked with bullies in the workplace, and I've worked with bullies in legal disputes. And I thought people need to know the patterns of bullies and not get hooked into them, because they can really diminish your self-esteem or get you angry at somebody else that you maybe really shouldn't be angry at, that you don't even know. People started hating people that they didn't even know. So I wanted to explain the same patterns at all levels of society and also some of the background of it. And my theory that these bully personalities really overlap with personality disorders, and that they really may be ancient personalities, that thousands of years ago, these personalities may have thrived, but today they don't work well in an office or in a home. And so I wanted to explain we shouldn't be angry at these people. We should learn to set limits on them and have consequences, and maybe even coach them to change their behavior if that's possible. So I wanted to give the big picture, I guess, as well as the what to do.
Yeah, what I really liked the way you laid it out was you described the dynamic in the chapter, and then you also described some of the stereotypes or the assumptions that we commonly make. And then you
Yes.
break that stereotype apart by saying why it doesn't work. I'm curious, why do you think we develop these almost like myths about bullying behavior that when you actually try to practice it, it doesn't work? Like you said, they're myths or stereotypes.
Yeah. Well, two things. I think human nature is to be open to people, that, we're very social creatures. And so we're very forgiving and figure, oh, they made a mistake. And so people really take a long time to catch on to, hey, this is a bully. I'm being bullied and I have to do something about it. So there's that. But I also think that our culture really promotes fantasies about bullies. Like there's a lot of movies that show people being a bully at the beginning of the movie, and at the end they have this insight about their behavior, and suddenly they become more lovable and friendly. Sometimes I call it the Jack Nicholson syndrome, because he's in a lot of movies where that happens. He's just a total jerk at the beginning, and at the end he's kind of warm and cuddly, and that's not real life. And I want people to know it's very unlikely that their behavior will change, especially if there's no form of intervention. And that's what real life is. But most people haven't experienced it also because bullying mostly goes on in private. And so people don't know how it works and the extent to which it exists.
What do you think is the biggest myth that we culturally hold about bullying behavior?
I think it's the first one I address, which is that they will stop themselves. They will come to their senses, that they will realize this is bad behavior and that I probably don't need to do anything and it'll stop. And so the biggest myth is that they will stop themselves when in fact, usually we're going to have to do something, either some kind of intervention or getting away from the bully. But they really don't seem to have the self-control that our culture thinks that they do.
Do you think we actually have the means as a society to curb behavior, to affect behavior? When you talk to victims, they often feel like they've been exhausted, they've gone to the extent that they can, and they still end up feeling in a very helpless position.
Well, I think because I'm a lawyer, I think when you really look at the history of the legal systems and such, is laws and rules were established to curb the worst behavior. And over the evolution of humanity, we've really developed more and more refined rules. So you can say certain things, but you can't yell fire in an auditorium. You can do certain things, but your freedom ends where my nose begins. And so part of our culture is to set limits on behavior. I think what's happened in the last 30 or 40 years is a good thing and a not so good thing. One good thing is we've really opened up society, and people can travel, they can meet people from anywhere in the world. We've increased access to justice. When I became a lawyer, that was a big part of the legal system, is we want everyone to be able to afford coming to court and being heard. So, like, fees are waived if you're low income, and you don't have to have a lawyer to go to court. So all of this openness, I think, was good. But the not so good part, I think, is the media culture with images of extreme behavior. And when you think of it, entertainment gets attention because it shows extreme behavior. A well-functioning society works because we don't use extreme behavior or we have limits on it. And so we're really shifting society from being mostly working and functioning to mostly, in many ways, becoming an entertainment society, which values the exact opposite behavior. And so that's the maybe not so good part, is we have all these media sources, cable, 24/7 news, social media. All of this is really showing images of bad behavior. And yet, if we did those in our home, if we did those in our workplace, they wouldn't work. And we're starting to see that. It's kind of like life imitating art, and it's happened without us even realizing it. But to me, that's the stark difference. A well-functioning community relationship has lots of roles and expectations and responsibilities, but the entertainment culture doesn't have roles really and responsibilities because it's fictional. But we're getting fiction now mixed up with reality. I think that's a big part of it.
It's interesting. I can't remember exactly the name of the film. It's like when Roger Rabbit met Jessica. Remember that film that had the mix of the cartoon with reality? And there was discussions about the impact that was going to have. There would be a blending of fantasy with reality. Now, it didn't happen in that way, although AI is certainly bringing in a new component that's really super scary. But it is interesting how there has been this confusion of what civil behavior is. And I know a lot of people do blame social media. It feels that way. I mean, but I don't know if it's always historically been this way or it's just my awareness has changed.
I think we've had it before social media for maybe 10 years before that. When news went into the courtroom, when news went into Congress, then we started seeing court and Congress as entertainment and, Judge Judy and all of that. And people get excited. They like the adversarial, because that's what drives drama, is crises and evil villains and superheroes. So we had that. Then social media speeded it up. And I think that's the thing. Social media, we know research shows us that false statements on social media travel faster and farther than true statements. My theory is, and when I've read the research, it says that false statements have more emotion to them. And I think it's because of the emotion. Emotions travel farther and faster than facts and boring discussions of reality. And so what social media has speeded up our exposure time and our reaction time. So we're now more emotional and we're reacting fast with emotions and reflecting less. So social media, I think, heightened emotions and reduced reflection. Now, add the pandemic to that. I think that really was the ultimate, because we were really on screens all the time and not interacting with real people. And then, so I think people lost some social skills with the pandemic, and we're still seeing the outcome of that. We're more emotional, less reflective, and more quick to respond with, not very smart responses.
It's interesting that you used the word bully versus why not use the word narcissism or some other word? What caused you to land on that word?
I think because I wanted to make it broadly accessible to people. For much of the last 15, 20 years, actually, as a professional, I've been focused on the term high conflict personalities. Basically, people with personality disorders or traits who are in conflicts. And that's what I saw in the legal system. So I've been talking about high conflict personalities, but I find the average person thinks of the same thing really as bullies. And that bullies, everybody knows kind of what a bully looks like and how they act and how uncomfortable it can make you feel. So what I explain in the book is I think that the foundation that there's 3 personality disorders that may be present in a lot of bullies. And narcissists may be the biggest one, but also antisocial because of their lack of remorse, very aggressive behavior, and also borderline with wide mood swings. And male borderline seem to be the most prevalent in domestic violence. And research says that male borderlines and antisocials are the most overlap with domestic violence.
We don't talk a lot about the male borderline personality disorder. Why do you think we don't focus on them much?
Well, I think historically, people have mixed up male borderlines as antisocial. You think of a lot of criminal behavior and violence, more associate that with antisocial, more criminal. But the big study I looked at that came out in 2004 to 2008, done by the National Institutes of Health, showed that borderline seemed to be about, their statistic was 46% male, 54% female. So almost equal. And I know Marshall Lanahan, the borderline expert that we hear about the most, agrees with that and says that male borderlines are just about as prevalent as female borderlines. I think the big difference is historically, female borderlines have gotten treatment or attempted to get treatment, and male borderlines certainly don't seek treatment and haven't been recognized as borderlines by mental health professionals. But good research shows that male borderlines and male antisocial personalities are the two personality disorders most common in domestic violence. They're both in cluster B. Let me say a little bit about cluster B. So cluster B in the diagnostic manual includes borderline, narcissistic, antisocial, and histrionic, which is a more dramatic. But research now tells us cluster B tend to be domineering, vindictive, and intrusive. That all four of these kind of as a cluster. And to me, that's describing bullies: domineering, vindictive, and intrusive. Bullies want to know what's going on in your head. You have to tell me your secrets, but I won't tell you mine. And they're domineering and they're very vindictive. If I don't get my way, I'm going to hurt you. And we see that in families, workplace, online especially. We see it today in politics, international relations, in business. So that's why I like the word bully. It's kind of a comprehensive term.
They're so difficult to spot in the beginning because the self-confidence, that the leading with their full chest, is very an appealing quality. Why do you think we miss that this is actually a danger sign, not something that we should see as admirable?
I think it's human nature. We default to being trusting, and people might be surprised to know that. But if a stranger comes up to you and asks for directions or what time it is, we want to help. I fly a lot. This year I took some trains more than usual. And at airports and train stations, people are often lost and confused and will come up and ask a question. And everyone wants to help. There was a movie years ago that airports are one of the happiest places because people get to greet their relatives and friends arriving. And a Hugh Grant movie. It was a rom-com kind of thing. But we just default to wanting to help people, and consequently, we're suckers when it comes to bullies because they know this about us and play on that. And of course, narcissistic bullies are probably the most skilled at this. Charm, we now say charm is a warning sign. Doesn't mean someone's going to be a bully or a narcissist, whatever. But most bullies and narcissists are very charming because that covers up the other side of them.
Yeah, they're very good at the first impression, but boy, they're lousy when it comes to sustaining a relationship. And I think what frustrates survivors so much is that it's difficult to get out. They want to burn the whole world down. They certainly want to destroy you in that process. How can we navigate that in a more sophisticated way? Because I'm thinking of someone right now that literally this person is exhausting her emotionally as well as financially in this process, just won't end it, won't give her closure, wrapping up their divorce.
Yeah. Well, divorce is particularly difficult with this because that's where the domineering and vindictive can really come out. And I see that in a lot of what I'm used to calling high conflict divorces. But several things, I think, for one is getting a therapist can really help. Don't go it alone. And in my book, I have 6 strategies that I address with each of these patterns of behavior. The first is really recognize I'm dealing with a bully. I'm not dealing with an ordinary person. I'm not dealing with someone who can stop themselves. So they're going to need to be stopped by me, by other people, or by getting away from them. The second is pulling the plug on them. You may be participating. You may be keeping things a secret that shouldn't be kept a secret. You may be supporting in some ways because you feel obligated to. So check yourself for, am I supporting the bully in any way? Can I pull the plug on those things, especially secrecy? And with that, I say, talk to other people, talk to somebody, and that's where a therapist can help.
What would be an example of a secret?
Oh, don't tell anybody that I've hit you.
Oh, that kind. Okay.
Yeah.
Like, don't talk about what's happening in the house.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So that black eye is don't tell anybody where you got that. Tell them you fell down on a doorknob, or you were drunk or something like that. And I'd say most bullies tell their victims, survivors, don't tell anybody. Don't say what really happened. And I have examples in the book of that. There's a touching example, the young woman assistant to the New York governor. And he apparently was touching her way inappropriately, and she was keeping it a secret. And she thought to herself, I'm going to take this to the grave. Then he's on TV saying, I've never touched anybody inappropriately, and I've never done this and that. And she was horrified because the impression she got is this is probably going on with other people. And so she talked to the administrators, and it eventually led to him resigning when it came out in public. But she was very brave to no longer keep that a secret. And I saw that in other examples too, where when people stopped keeping it a secret, then action was taken and the bully was stopped.
It's tough because, I shared with you before we went on air is that I also survived a narcissistically abusive relationship. And that's one of the things he established right from the beginning was what happens in this relationship needs to stay in this relationship. I mean, he kind of laid a rule down. But the other piece for me that made it so difficult to talk about was I felt shame for his shameful behavior. I owned what he did, even though I know it wasn't me, and I didn't even blame myself. I know I didn't make him do those things, but because we're a couple and it creates an identity as a couple, then when he really does something horrifically awful, I feel like it's a reflection on me too.
Right, exactly. And people lose self-esteem, become immobilized. In fact, I talk about how bullies immobilize people. They immobilize your defenses and self-esteem goes down. It gets harder to get out rather than easier. And by explaining that in depth in the book, I hope people get the idea that people need help to get out. And one example I gave was the famous musician in the UK, FKA Twigs, who got into a domestic violence relationship with a guy in LA, and she lost self-esteem, she felt trapped, she felt depressed. And after a year, somehow she sought a therapist and then helped her get out of that. But the reality was she was a wealthy woman. She owned property in the UK, and she could have just taken a plane and in 10 hours been back home, but she couldn't move herself. She was immobilized. And that, to me, her telling her story is so helpful because she sued him, and I don't know if the case is finished yet, but she wanted people to know. And that's a lot of my goal with the book. I want people to know what mostly goes on in private because so many people are experiencing this.
Yeah, it is really hard. And that's why I shared my story as well and wrote Love You More, is because I want people to know that you can even be a psychologist and still get trapped in one of these relationships. In fact, my sons at the end, when I had this big conversation with my adult sons and I was feeling really ashamed, and they looked at me and said, Mom, he used your best qualities against you. And that felt like so releasing because that's what they do. Like you had said earlier, they're very good at weaponizing our natural, trusting good nature, our desire to be cooperative and collaborative. They utilize those things against us.
Absolutely. And one thing that I've realized working with a lot of cases over the last 40 years is a surprising thing, and that's about apologies. Apologies are very common in abusive relationships, only the wrong person's apologizing. It's like, I'm sorry I didn't do this right. I'm sorry I didn't do that right. I did a mediation once. The parties agreed it was a divorce mediation and there had been domestic violence. But at one point, the guy pulls out a crumpled up note and says, see, remember when you admitted it's all your fault? I'm sorry I don't clean better. I'm sorry I don't cook better. And that this person was trying to calm a bully from hurting her. And that's one thing we teach is don't apologize to a bully, basically. With 80 to 90% of people, apologies are simply what they are. I say I apologize at least once a week to people I work with. There's something I forget, I mess up. Oh, I'm sorry I forgot that. But when you're dealing with a bully, when you apologize, you're putting yourself one down, and that's their goal. And they're going to manipulate that. So that's a very paradoxical thing, but I see in a lot of abusive relationships.
Do you think female bullies are different than male bullies?
I don't think fundamentally. I think the nuances are different and there's different skills. I think in many ways that female bullies have better verbal skills and also much better playing the victim. And I think of an antisocial bully who was a woman who came to me for help with her divorce. And I worked with her maybe for a month or so. There were no court hearings. Well, she was antisocial. She was total lies. And I found out her job was taking care of an elderly man. And she said she's doing that. I said, oh, it's such a good thing. You're such a good person doing that. Well, at some point, she disappeared. And I get a call from the elderly man saying, she mentioned you were her lawyer. Can you help me? She stole $50,000 from me, and I don't know where she is now. And I said, oh, my goodness, call the elder abuse people. But I don't know where she is either. And I did some work that I haven't been paid for. But she was telling big stories about her ex-husband being the worst person in the world. And I was getting ready. We're going to end up getting ready to go to court. I think it was all made up. I don't think anything she told me was true. And I must say, she was short and cute and charming and just someone you'd really want to help.
Yeah,
so
likable.
I think that's the female bullies, and especially female narcissists, female antisocials, can pour it on, and they know they're pouring it on.
I know you and I could talk for forever. There's so much I want to ask you, but we need to wrap it up. But I thought of something I want to follow up with you over on the podcast extra, and that is, what do you think of using gray rock or yellow rock as a legal method in a conflictual or tense divorce, like particularly custody case? I want to follow up with that over there and talk about what should you do? Is that wise to do that? But thank you so much for joining me. How can people find out more about our new world of adult bullies and more about you if they're interested in following up with this?
Well, they can get the book anywhere. It's a paperback, an ebook, an audiobook on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. And they can find me and the book if they want on our website at highconflictinstitute.com. High, H-I-G-H, conflictinstitute.com. We have a lot of free articles, as well as we do consultation, books, video training, all of that. The only thing that's free is the articles, but we have a lot of low-cost information, and the books are like less than $20. So we got a lot of books on things to do to deal with high-conflict situations.
Well, thank you for being in this arena, for helping so many of us deal with very difficult situations. I deeply appreciate that, and I deeply appreciate this interview today. This was really fascinating. So thank you so much, Bill. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Kerry, and thank you for your good work.
Well, that's a wrap for this week's episode. Are you following me on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube? Find me at Kerry McAvoy, Ph.D. Now you don't need to wait a week to get your next podcast fix. Join Breaking Free from Narc Abuse at Substack.com to get exclusive audio content for subscribers. To sign up, click the link in the show notes. And whether you're in, consider leaving, or have left a narcissistic relationship, find community support at my Toxic Free Relationship Club. You can learn about this resource as well as others at KerryMcAvoyPhD.com. And I'll see you back here next week.